My name is Cameron Reed. I'm 32 years old, and my father used to say that no matter how beautiful a house looks from the outside, it's the foundation that decides whether it survives the storm. He was a construction worker his whole life, built things meant to last. He taught me that cracks don't appear all at once, they whisper first. I built my life around that belief. Trust the structure. Trust the people beside you. Trust the family waiting when you come home. For 2 years, I believed the foundation of my life with Evan was solid. I was wrong. Evan and I were supposed to be married in 4 months. He was charming, confident, and ambitious in a way that made people lean in when he spoke. My parents adored him. They treated him like the son they never had. My mother taught him her recipes. My father shared stories he rarely told anyone. 3 months ago, they sat us down at their kitchen table and slid a check across the wood. It was a huge portion of their retirement. A family needs a home, my dad said, his voice steady but emotional. This is your foundation. I remember Evan's eyes lighting up. I remember the way he hugged them, tight, grateful, convincing. He told them they were the best parents anyone could ask for. Last Sunday, we had dinner at my parents' house. Roast in the oven, laughter, familiar comfort. I noticed Evan was quieter than usual, sharper, but I blamed stress, wedding pressure, old memories, especially involving his ex-girlfriend, a woman he'd once described as toxic, yet somehow still looming in his insecurities. After dinner, my mom brought out an old photo album. Baby pictures, awkward stages, love preserved in paper. I can't wait to have you as part of this family, my mom said softly, and one day, grandkids running through this house. That's when Evan looked up. He smiled, but it wasn't warmth, it was possession. Don't get too comfortable, he said lightly, patting my mom's hand. Once we're married, your family won't really matter anymore. It'll be about mine. The room went silent. I watched my mother's smile freeze. I watched my father straighten, his jaw tightening. And I watched Evan glance at me, testing, measuring, waiting to see if I'd choose him. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I nodded. Slowly. That was the moment I saw the crack. And that was the moment I decided the house wasn't getting built. The drive home was silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence you sink into after a good meal. This was the kind that presses on your chest, the kind that turns every streetlight into an interrogation lamp. Evan tried to fill it anyway. He talked about the wedding like it was a movie he'd already seen and was just waiting for me to show up and read my lines. Mom wants us to upgrade the seating, he said, scrolling on his phone at a red light. And my aunt found this band. Expensive, but worth it. My family expects a certain level. I kept my eyes on the road. He glanced at me. You're quiet. I'm tired. He accepted that answer immediately, like a man used to the world accepting his version of things. When we got home, he went straight to the shower, humming. Like he hadn't just looked my mother in the eye and erased her. I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the water run, letting the truth settle into place. That smug little smile at dinner hadn't been an accident. It was a preview, a rehearsal. I went into my office, shut the door, and sat at my desk where blueprints and reports were stacked neatly in piles. Order, logics, load-bearing beams, systems that held under pressure. My hands didn't shake, but something inside me did. I pulled out my phone and called my parents. My mother answered on the second ring, trying to sound normal and failing. Hi, honey, she said, voice too bright. Mom, I said gently, I'm coming by in the morning before work. There was a pause. Okay, she whispered, okay. The next morning, their house looked the same as it always did. Same trimmed hedges, same wind chime by the porch, same scent of coffee and laundry detergent and safety. But when my dad opened the door, his face looked heavier, like the night had placed a brick inside his chest. My mom hugged me too long, like she was afraid if she let go, I'd vanish. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd handed us their trust in the form of a check. My mom twisted a napkin between her fingers. I keep thinking, she said, maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I pushed too hard with the grandkids talk. No. My voice came out sharper than I meant. I softened it immediately. No, Mom, you didn't do anything. You were being you. You were being kind. My dad stared down at his coffee, jaw clenched. I heard it, he said finally. Every word. And then I looked at you, Cam, and you just nodded. I met his eyes. I nodded because if I'd reacted, he would have turned it into a fight. He would have made it about tone, about disrespect, about me being emotional. I swallowed. And I needed to see exactly who he was when he thought he was winning. My mother's eyes filled. He didn't mean it, she said, but it sounded like she was trying to convince herself. My dad's voice went low. Yes, he did. I reached into my bag and took out my checkbook. My mother blinked, confused. I wrote the number carefully, digit by digit, the exact amount they'd given us. Then I slid it across the table. My mom stared at it like it was a funeral notice. "Cameron," she breathed. "I can't accept it," I said. "Not for a future that—" I stopped myself. Not yet. Not until I had control. Not until I'm sure the foundation is solid. My dad's hand moved toward the check, then stopped midair. "You don't have to—" "I do," I cut in, firm now. "That money is your retirement, your safety. You didn't work your whole life just to hand it over to someone who thinks love is a power play." My mother wiped at her tears. My dad finally picked up the check like it was something fragile. Then I leaned forward. "I need one more thing from you," I said quietly. Both of them looked at me. "I need you to trust me," I continued, "no matter what you hear, no matter what he says, no matter what story he tells people." My dad studied my face. My mother's lip trembled. "Are you leaving him?" my mom asked. I didn't answer directly, not because I didn't know, but because saying it out loud felt like pulling the fire alarm. It would make everything start moving too fast. "I'm handling it," I said. "But if he comes here, if he tries to talk to you, I need you to remember what he said, and I need you to protect yourselves." My dad nodded once, hard. My mom nodded too, but it was slower, like it hurt. "Okay," she whispered. "We trust you." And in that moment, I realized something Evan never understood. My parents didn't love because it benefited them. They loved because that's who they were. That evening, I came home from work and found Evan in the living room with papers spread across the coffee table. Final invoices, vendor contracts, deposit deadlines circled in red marker like a countdown. He looked up at me like I was late to a meeting. "Perfect timing," he said, tapping the stack. "We need to transfer the money from the house fund. Deposits are due, and my mom wants the upgraded florals." I set my keys down slowly. I stared at the papers, then at him. "Sure," I said evenly. Evan's face brightened, like he'd expected resistance and was pleased it didn't come. He launched into details. Roses, lighting, champagne, guest list politics. Every word was about presentation, about his family, about impressing people who would forget our names a year from now. I nodded along like I was listening, but I wasn't. I was watching. Because when someone shows you who they are, the smartest thing you can do is let them keep talking until they expose the whole blueprint. That night, after Evan went to bed, I opened my laptop in my office and pulled up every single wedding email we'd ever received. Venue, caterer, photographer, band, planner. I started a spreadsheet. Names, dates, contracts, cancellation clauses. I read every line like my future depended on it, because it did. And with every clause, every penalty fee, every shared liability, I felt Evan's smug little smirk from my parents' living room echo inside my skull. "Once we're married, your family won't matter anymore." He thought marriage was a lock, a title, a takeover. He didn't realize he'd said it out loud before the paperwork was signed, which meant he'd given me something priceless. Time. 2 days later, I went to see a lawyer. Not a dramatic TV-style lawyer with flashy suits and big speeches. A quiet woman named Marissa who listened without interrupting, eyes sharp as glass. When I finished explaining, she leaned back in her chair. "Is the property in your name?" she asked. "Yes." "And the vendor contracts?" "Both of us," I said, "signed jointly." Marissa nodded. "Then we do this clean. We do this legally. We do this in a way he can't twist into a story where you're the villain." I exhaled slowly, because that was exactly what I needed. Marissa drafted documents, notices, a formal plan, a timeline. And as I walked out of her office, the sunlight felt different. Not brighter, clearer, like the air before a storm breaks. Evan noticed my calm and mistook it for submission. He started acting bolder, more casual with his disrespect. He'd roll his eyes when my mom texted about Sunday dinner. He'd joke about how, once we're married, holidays will be at my parents' place. He said it like it was a done deal. And every time he said it, I smiled a little. Not because it was funny, because it was proof. Proof he didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as a foundation he could stand on while he built his kingdom. One evening, while he was on speakerphone with his mother, I heard her say, loud and proud, "Good. Make sure Cameron understands how things work in a real family." Evan laughed, and when he caught my eye, he lifted his eyebrows like we shared a secret. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and kept my face neutral. Inside, something settled into place like a final bolt locking. Because now I knew. This wasn't just Evan. This was a system. A lineage. A belief that love meant control. And I was done being part of their architecture. That night, while Evan slept, I made one more call. Not to a lawyer. Not to a vendor. To someone who could quietly pull the curtain back on the family he kept elevating above mine. Someone who could tell me what kind of foundation his world was built on. When the call ended, I sat in the dark office with the laptop glow reflecting in the window, my own face staring back at me like a stranger. And I whispered so softly it barely counted as sound. "Let's see what you're really made of." The report came back faster than I expected. 3 days. That's all it took to confirm what my instincts had already been screaming at me. I sat alone in my office, laptop open, scrolling through page after page of neatly organized reality. Numbers, liens, balances, missed payments buried under polished surfaces. Evan's family wasn't wealthy. They were performing wealth. Second mortgage on this house. Maxed out credit cards spread across 3 banks. A recent personal loan application, denied. The big home his parents loved to host in, borrowed time. The leased cars parked in the driveway like trophies, rented illusions. It was a house of cards, balanced delicately on my income, my stability, my credit, my silence. And Evan had known. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to understand that marrying me didn't just mean love. It meant rescue. It meant reinforcement. It meant a stronger foundation than the one he'd inherited. I closed the laptop slowly and leaned back in my chair. So this was the real blueprint. My family was irrelevant because we weren't useful to his image. His family mattered because they needed me. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity. That evening, Evan came home energized, riding a high that came from feeling in control. He dropped a stack of fresh invoices onto the kitchen island like he was slamming down a winning hand. "Okay," he said, loosening his tie. "We're officially behind schedule. Deposits are due tomorrow." I glanced at the papers. Venue. Caterer. Florals. Upgraded again. "Just transfer the money from the house fund tonight," he continued. "My mom's already talking to relatives. This wedding needs to make a statement." I folded my arms. "There is no house fund," he laughed. A short, sharp sound. Very funny. "I gave the money back to my parents last week." The laughter died mid-breath. "You what?" "I returned it," I said evenly. "It wasn't ours to keep." Evan stared at me like I'd spoken in another language. "Cameron, that was our down payment." "No," I corrected softly. "It was their retirement." His voice rose. "You didn't even ask me?" "I didn't need to." He slammed his palm on the counter. "You had no right." "I had every right," I cut in, my tone still calm. The house was supposed to be our foundation, and I realized something was already cracked. His eyes narrowed. "This is about that stupid dinner thing, isn't it?" I didn't answer, because now it was time. I walked to my office and returned with a single manila envelope. I placed it gently on the island between us. "What's this?" he demanded. "Our ending," he scoffed. "You're being dramatic." I slid the envelope closer. "Open it." Reluctantly, he did. His face changed as he flipped through the contents. Vendor contracts, highlighted, liability clauses, circled. A formal notice granting him 30 days to vacate my home. Then his hand stilled. He pulled out the last document. His parents denied loan application. The color drained from his face. "You went digging into my family?" he whispered. "I went looking for the truth," I replied, "because I wanted to know what kind of structure you were trying to build on top of me." He laughed again, but this time it was shaky. "This is insane. You're breaking up with me over one comment?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm breaking up with you because you showed me who you are, and I believe you." He stared at me like he was waiting for me to blink. "You can't do this," he said. "Do you have any idea what this will cost me?" "Yes," I said. "That's why I made sure you understood the numbers." His voice dropped, dangerous now. "So what, you think you're better than us?" I met his gaze without flinching. "I think love isn't leverage." Silence fell between us, thick and heavy. Finally, Evan looked down at the papers again. "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked, his voice cracking despite himself. "How am I supposed to pay for all this?" I straightened, feeling strangely light. "You'll figure it out," I said. "You're smart. You just made a bad investment." I turned away and walked out of the kitchen, leaving him alone with the wreckage of the life he'd assumed was guaranteed. That night, I slept in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house. And for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. The fallout was immediate. Angry texts, voicemails swinging between rage and pleading, messages from his parents demanding explanations. I didn't respond. Marissa handled everything. A single letter went out, clean and firm. All further contact would be considered harassment. The calls stopped. The vendor calls didn't. They went straight to Evan. Late fees, cancellation penalties, contracts he'd signed without reading because he'd assumed I would cover the consequences. Just like I always had. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Cameron, Evan's here. My stomach tightened, not in fear, but anticipation. "He's on the porch," she continued. "He's crying." I closed my eyes. This was the moment everything had been moving toward. "I talked to you about this," I said gently. "I know," she whispered. I wanted to tell you." "Did you open the door?" "Yes." A pause. "He's asking for help." I exhaled slowly. "Mom," I said, "remember what he said to you." There was silence on the line. Then my mother spoke again, her voice steadier now. "I remember." I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, knowing exactly what was happening miles away. Evan was finally standing in front of the people he'd dismissed, not as a future son-in-law, not as a man in control, but as someone who needed what he'd thrown away. And my mother, gentle, kind, endlessly forgiving, was about to do the hardest thing she'd ever done. I didn't go to my parents' house that day. That was important. Some moments don't belong to the person who started the fire. They belong to the ones who were burned. Later, my mother told me everything. She said Evan looked smaller than she remembered, like the confidence had drained out of him and left behind a man she barely recognized. His eyes were red, his voice unsteady. He stood on the porch, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a child who knew he was about to be told no. He started talking before she could say a word. He said he'd made a mistake. He said stress had made him say things he didn't mean. He said he loved me. He said he loved them. Then his voice broke. He told her about the vendors, the debt, the calls that wouldn't stop, the way his parents had turned on him the moment they realized I wasn't fixing it. He asked for a loan. Not a gift, not charity. A loan, he kept saying, just enough to get me through this. My mother listened. That part surprised him. She didn't interrupt. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even cry. She just let him empty himself out onto the porch like a confession. When he finally stopped talking, she said his name once, quietly. "Evan." He looked up at her with something close to hope. "I'm sorry," she said, "but we can't help you." He blinked. I don't understand." She nodded slowly, like she did understand, like she understood perfectly. "You were right," she continued, her voice calm but firm. "You told us that once you were married, we wouldn't matter anymore, that everything would be about your family." He opened his mouth to protest. She lifted her hand. "We've decided to respect that," she said, "starting now." He stared at her, frozen. "This is something your family needs to solve." And then, this is the part that broke me when she told it, she said she wished him well. Not sarcastically, not cruelly. She wished him well the way you do when you're letting go of someone forever. Then she closed the door. She said the silence afterward was loud. She watched through the window as he stood there for a long time, head bowed, hands shaking, like he was waiting for someone to change their mind. No one did. Eventually, he walked back to his car. The texts started that night. They weren't angry anymore. They weren't entitled. They were raw. "I didn't know what I had until it was gone. Your mom closing that door was the worst moment of my life. I understand now." I didn't reply, because understanding after destruction doesn't rebuild anything. Over the next few weeks, the consequences settled in. Evan couldn't pay the cancellation fees. His parents couldn't help him. The arguments in their house turned vicious. Blame bounced from room to room like a live wire. I heard through mutual acquaintances that his family had stopped speaking to each other, except to accuse. The image they'd worked so hard to maintain collapsed under the weight of reality. I felt no satisfaction. Just distance, like watching a storm from solid ground. 6 months later, my life is quieter. Not emptier, quieter. I'm still working, still waking up early, still trusting the people beside me, still coming home to a place that feels like mine. My parents and I talk every day. A few months ago, I took the money they'd once offered me, added my own savings, and set up a trust for them. Something safe, something untouchable. My dad hugged me and said, "That's a real foundation." I haven't heard Evan's voice since that day on the porch. I did receive one final letter, sent through a lawyer. It was long, apologetic, self-aware in a way he'd never been before. He wrote that the closed door taught him more than any argument ever could, that he'd been raised to believe love was about leverage, about upgrading, about choosing the better deal. He said he finally understood that love isn't a transaction. It's a foundation. He said he cracked his beyond repair. I didn't respond, because some lessons don't need closure. They need silence. And some doors, once closed, are doing exactly what they were meant to do. 6 months is a long time when you finally stop holding your breath. I didn't realize how tense my body had been until it wasn't anymore. How every decision, every conversation, every compromise with Evan had quietly demanded something from me. Attention. Adjustment. Submission dressed up as partnership. Now my days move at a different pace. I wake up early, I drink my coffee in silence. I go to work knowing exactly who I am and where I stand. The house feels bigger without him, but not lonelier. It feels honest. My parents come over for dinner once a week now, not out of obligation, out of closeness. We laugh more than we used to. We talk about small things, safe things, things that don't come with conditions. A few months after everything ended, I took the money they'd once offered for the down payment. I added a significant amount of my own and put it into a trust for them. Something stable, something protected. When I told them, my father didn't say much. He just hugged me, tight. For the first time in my life, I saw tears in his eyes. That, he said quietly, is a real foundation. Evan's life unraveled the way unstable structures always do. Slowly, then all at once. The wedding debts were real. The contracts unforgiving. Without my credit, my income, my silence, the illusion collapsed. He declared bankruptcy. It was public, humiliating, permanent in all the ways that matter. His parents blamed him for not securing the future he'd promised them. The pressure cracked their relationship beyond repair. The house he'd once bragged about became a cage filled with resentment. He lost his job shortly after. Stress, missed deadlines, poor performance. Without my network smoothing things over, there was no safety net. I didn't celebrate any of it. I didn't need to. The consequences weren't my revenge. They were his education. The last thing I ever received from Evan was that letter. Pages of regret. Insight earned too late. He wrote that he finally understood what he'd thrown away. Not just me, but my family. The kind of people who would have stood by him without keeping score. He wrote that the silence after my mother closed the door was the loudest sound he'd ever heard. He was right. That door did more than end a conversation. It ended an illusion. I never responded, because there was nothing left to explain. I used to think strength meant endurance. Staying, fixing, holding things together no matter the cost. Now I know better. Real strength is knowing when something is built wrong, and having the courage to step away before it collapses on you. I didn't destroy Evan's life. I simply removed myself from being the foundation he was standing on. What he built after that was his responsibility. As for me, I'm at peace. I have a family that matters, a life that's quiet and strong, a foundation that will hold. And that's the only thing I'll ever build on again.